What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we don't have a Jeep behind us, just a couple trucks, and we're doing truck things, including a new 6-inch lift for this Toyota Tundra. There we have it. The brand new Tundra is out, and me and everyone that I hang out with refuse, and I mean refuse, to leave anything stock. So because of that, my buddy Zane ordered a lift kit for the Tundra, and it's about to get 6 inches taller today. Or at least that's what we hope, because we're kind of the first ones to do this. This is a 2-wheel drive Tundra, and the kit that we have is for 4-wheel drive, and we're being the guinea pigs. So let's see what could go wrong. All right, so I got here a little late. We got a little head start on this side already. As you can see, tires off, brake rotor's off. We pulled the caliper. We have that resting here. There is one thing to note, a hard line that goes to another soft line on that caliper. So definitely make sure you're not just kind of letting it hang. Wouldn't want anything to damage that, because I'm sure you can't find the part to replace it. Outside of that, this being a 2-wheel drive truck, we're not going to need the bolt to pull the drive shaft out of here. However, the axle shaft rather. However, that's a 43 millimeter if you need it. But before we get to all of that, we definitely want to make sure we pull out this wheel speed sensor. That's probably like a 10 millimeter. And then we're also going to unhook the tie rod up top. That should free up everything. So to get this tie rod out, you can either try the old-fashioned way and smack the knuckle a little bit. If that's not working, toss that nut back on upside down. Don't want to leave any of that tie rod end exposed, but we'll go ahead and just hit that with a hammer, and she should pop right out. Just like that. All right, so we had to pull off the skid plate from under here, and then we're going to need to unplug the solenoid that's attached here. So we went ahead and pulled the sway bar out. That's actually going to get a drop bracket, so it's nice and low. That's going to give us the distance we need to make up from the 6-inch lift. It's always good to just go ahead and toss your bolts back in the original hole so you know where they are and you don't lose them. 20 minutes in, we already got blood. Go ahead and leave that a little bit loose on there just so knuckle doesn't fall on your head, and then you can move on to the bottom. If you're doing this by hand, you're definitely going to have to put some ass behind it, because these bolts are pretty tight. And now that we've gotten this off, I actually kind of think we maybe didn't need to take the bottom ball joint out, but that's fine. We're going to figure this out as we go. These bolts are definitely going to come off because we're going to pull the knuckle off of there. Toyota did a really nice thing with giving us a nice little spot on the knuckle to punch with a sledgehammer. And that should go ahead and drop the ball joint right out of there. There's one on the bottom here too. As I suspected, we actually didn't need to do anything with this bottom ball joint. That's no big deal though. So yeah, we went ahead and separated this out. We'll pull that bolt from the top. The knuckle will be free, and we'll be able to swap the hub assembly over onto the new knuckle. And you're going to use an Allen 12 to be able to pull off the bolts on the inside of the knuckle. Of course, on a 4-wheel drive, this is going to look a lot different, but on a 2-wheel drive, since we're testing this out for the first time, this is what we're seeing. All right, so your hub can only go on one way. The two closer bolt holes are going to be at the top, and your dust shield will coincide with that. So you're going to swap the dust shield over, and it's probably a little bit easier to have a buddy to help. And then the bolts will go in through the back. Went ahead and got the rest of this bolted back together. Got it tight enough. I'm sure there's a torque spec on there, and you definitely should look that up, but this will work for us. All right, so we set the knuckle aside for a bit. Now we're gonna go ahead and hit the shock, the coilover itself, starting with the bolt at the bottom. Then you got a couple bolts on top. The upper control arm's actually gonna remain, so we're not worried about that, but we will end up dropping the whole lower control arm setup here, so we'll start with the shock. Getting access to these top bolts in the back is a little difficult. Probably going to want a ratcheting wrench for sure, and if you have an offset ratcheting wrench, even better. All right, you get your 4 top bolts out, and now we're loose. So you'll probably want to grab a buddy to push down the lower control arm while you pull the shock out. The shock is out, so now we're going to add the spacer to the top of it, and then we can tackle the lower cradle. So the spacer can only go on one way. The out symbol here is actually going to be where you're going to have this arch in the spacer itself. So you should have it lining up like that. Use your factory bolts to bolt up the spacer. Nice and tight. All right, so the spacers actually come with a stud setup, so you can actually run the bolts through the bottom. Then you're just gonna tighten the heck out of it until it pulls that stud flush. That'll be your stud for the top to actually bolt it through to the truck. All right, so we've reached the end of what we can do on just one side at a time. So now we're gonna go ahead, jack up the other side, repeat everything we just did over here, and that's gonna put us in this position to be able to go ahead and install the drop brackets. All right, so we're about to drop the lower control arms. It's important here for you to take some pictures or take a marker and just kind of mark where these cam bolts are. That's going to help you get your alignment as close as it can be to where it needs to be. Of course, you're going to want to go and have the truck aligned after you do this lift install, but at least you'll be able to drive it there to the alignment shop if you do it this way. So go ahead and mark where everything is now, and then start pulling these bolts. So this is the part where we are veering off of the regular directions. So in the regular directions, this cross member has to be notched, because if you've got a 4-wheel drive, you're gonna have a transfer case and a drive shaft coming up through here. And being that this is a 2-wheel drive, we don't have to worry about that, but we also don't know for sure if the kit's gonna work. It kind of looks like everything's going to, but you never know with these things. So with that said, we are gonna go ahead and proceed with pulling out these lower control arms and trying to fit up the drop brackets. We got the lower control arms out. Now we're going to grab the hardware and the drop brackets. Those should just go right up in place without any of the cutting, like I mentioned earlier. And that should save us a good bit of time. After that, it's just reassembly. There we go. All right, so the front drop bracket is in loosely. We're gonna go ahead and move on to the rear. because that's the one place that we're unsure of. All right, so the front drop bracket went in smooth. The rear, we're having a little bit of a tough time getting it to go up into place. I don't know if you guys can see, but right there, we're just making too much contact. Actually, the bracket seems like it's not wide enough to make it across both sides here on the factory setup. So, quick fix here. If we just cut the corner on that bracket, it should be able to slide past this, and then we should be able to bolt it up. All right, so as you saw, we were able to trim up the factory bracket just a little bit, and there we have it. So we got it all bolted in. We trimmed both sides just to make sure it was even, and all the cam bolts are in. Now we just need to put in the control arms. Driver's side lower control arm is on. We left everything loose. Trust me, you want to go and tighten everything back up. Most of that you're going to want to do on the ground. But next up is to bring the shock back over, put it in, and reconnect that tie rod. All right, so before we get the shock bolted back up, we are actually going to go ahead and take the impact, and if it'll focus for me, we are driving these studs up into the plate itself. These studs are going to be what bolt through into the truck, as I mentioned earlier. So we want to make sure they're nice and snug.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
Well, I don't know if you guys caught it in that clip, but Houston, we have a problem. The stud's just spinning in there. So I guess now we get to break out the welder. That's where we are. That's what we're dealing with. Probably not something that you will be dealing with, but who knows? I mean, just keep it in mind, I guess. Well, upon further inspection, turns out Rough Country actually sent like a jam nut and a hex nut to be able to use, I guess, to pull those studs through. And yeah, we didn't do it that way, so here we are. So we resorted to using a press and actually pressing these in from the beginning. Definitely the impact it until it gets to where it needs to be. It's not the way to go. Gotta fix the mistake somehow. Problem solved. All right, so the kit does come with a drop bracket for the brake line. So I'm gonna take a 13 millimeter, pull these guys off, install the drop bracket, and then that'll mount a little bit lower. All right, so I got the driver's side bracket installed, went to install the passenger side bracket, and realized we have two driver's side brackets. So I guess someone at Rough Country ended up sending us two of the same, which means we can't do the passenger side until we get that one. All right, so I'm looking just past the brake booster. That, I believe, is our tab that's holding that brake line that goes down. So I'm gonna pop that free, and that should give me a little bit of slack that I need to lower that down just a little bit. All right, so that popped free pretty easily. Now I can line this bracket up with these holes, bolt that in, and all right, driver's side drop bracket is in. And now Just pop this little plastic guy back up here. Perfect. All right, so we got the lower control arms back in. All the studs are through. Welded up the two that were messed up. We are all set to reinstall these front coilovers. So that's what we're going to do now. All right, so these guys that were on the ABS lines, we actually pulled those off and just went ahead and routed everything down the way that it's supposed to be. And of course, got the tie rod flip going on up front, so make sure you don't try and reinstall that on the bottom. Ask me how I figured that one out. All right, guys, so it's a new day. We ran out of light last night, and we were basically fixing everything we did wrong. But let me catch you up. Well, we still got to do the front sway bar and the skid plate, but if you're a Carolina boy, you're done. All right, so we jacked up the rear, threw some jack stands under there. Of course, you definitely want to chock your front tires with actual chocks probably. But we're gonna go ahead and start loosening some bolts. All right, so we pulled the drive shaft hoop down, went ahead and unhooked the brake line from this bolt here, as well as there was one more mounted to the frame there, and then another right there. And then on the other side from the axle. Shock is loose. Now we're going to get these sway bars off and the lower track bar bolt. And after that, we should be able to lower this axle down out of the way. And for reference, we've got a jack holding up the rear axle, and then the whole thing's on jack stands, of course. And be careful as you're lowering out the axle to check all your wires. Make sure nothing is getting away from you, and everything should loosen up. Now we're going to go ahead and pull out the springs, and then we're going to hit those upper control arm mounts and install the new bracket. And I spoke a little too soon. That upper control arm's not the one up there. You're going to hit it from the axle side. So we're going to loosen up these bolts here and here, and then that's going to give us what we need to be able to add the new bracket and the sleeve, and then we'll bolt that back up. All right, so that upper control arm bracket is a little difficult, fought us a little bit, but we got it on, got that bolt in as well. You're going to use the supplied hardware for the bottom along with the sleeve on the inside, and the factory hardware goes up top. Once you have that, just a recommendation to get this bolt in, you're going to want to loosen both sides, but that axle is going to want to spin back on you, so definitely make sure you don't let that happen. You are going to have to get that top bolt back in, and then go ahead and hit the other side over there. So with all that said, the only things after these two are going to be a couple more raised brackets for the shocks, the track bar, and then the spacer itself for the coil, and that's should have us pretty close to done. Got the bump stops installed in the rear, and the coil buckets actually went in really easily. We didn't get much footage of that, but it's pretty straightforward. And then of course your sway bar drops are pretty simple as well. So yeah, you can tell the back went together a lot easier than the front did. The front, we actually realized that we had reused the original cam bolts and we didn't need to. So the kit does come with 4 replacement bolts for the top side of the drop bracket. So we went ahead and swapped those out. A lot of this probably could have been solved if we had read the instructions prior to actually attempting the install. But we don't read no stinking instructions around here. We give you the instructions. Most of the time they're wrong. So anyways, that's where we're at. Looks pretty good though. All right, guys. Well, that's as far as we can get in this video. One thing that we discovered was the reason why you actually are going to have to go with a 20-inch wheel on this is from that knuckle flip that you're doing there on the tie rod. That actually was rubbing on the inside of the front wheels. So we went ahead and pulled those off. New wheels are on order. And yeah, this thing's going to be on 37s before you know it. But hopefully this video was helpful. Hopefully you can get some insight into some of the things that we did, some of the things that we ran into, so that hopefully you don't run into those. And yeah, like I said, for my Jeep people, I'm sure that you guys didn't make it this far into the video. But if you did, thanks so much for watching. Toyota people, maybe you'll see this thing again at some point, or maybe another Toyota on the channel. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.